This is Taylor. Can you hear me? I am.
Taylor, looks like they can hear you, but we can't hear them.
Yeah, I'm unable to hear you all.
Can you hear us now?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, we're on now, man.
But can they hear us on the other side? Taylor, can you hear us? This
I
is,
can. I can hear you now.
oh, wonderful. All right, Taylor, I think we're ready for you to start your presentation.
Oh,
We've had to change in the agenda. We've had to change it up a bit. Let me pull up your presentation.
okay. All right. Am I sharing on my side, or did you incorporate slides into a deck on your end?
Yes, I'm going to share this screen here. Just
Okay.
Can you see the slide?
I can see it.
Okay. All right. Why don't you just go ahead and let me know when you'd like me to advance the slides.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you. So yes, I'm presenting on the homelessness recommendations report that Echo Northwest is doing for the city of Madras. You can go to the next slide. I'll start with a brief introduction of myself. So I'm Taylor. I'm an associate at Echo Northwest, and I've been here for about 5 years. So I've done a lot of work with our comprehensive planning, housing planning, and some equity framework development. I'll be working with Madeline Barron, who is our project manager, Cadence Petros, who's our project director. Unfortunately, they couldn't be here today, but I'm also here with Beth Goodman, who's going to be our senior project advisor. Beth is working on the housing action plan with the city and has done a lot of work in Madras. So she's here today just in case she can provide any other contextual guidance and answer specific questions that she might be more suited to answer than I am. Next slide, please. So yeah, our homelessness recommendations report aims to answer a few primary research questions. Mainly, we want to look into what are the needs of the homeless population in Madras, what kinds of interventions might reduce the frequency, duration, and negative experiences of homelessness in Madras. And we also want to look into the programs and services that can help move people into permanent housing faster and more effectively. And next slide, please. So to answer those primary questions and help guide our ultimate recommendations, we want to host a series of engagements to start with. And this engagement would happen with the city council, and then of course with all of you on the homelessness advisory committee. And then in addition, we want to talk to service providers and people with lived experience. And so we're hoping to have some interviews and focus groups around that. And then after we do some engagement, sort of at the same time, actually, we're going to be conducting a homelessness services gap analysis. And so that's going to include an overview of population data. We're going to take a look at housing market data, and then we'll take a look at an inventory of all of the available homelessness services. And so some of the community engagement will help inform that services inventory, just to get an idea of what's out there. And then all of that information will help feed our homelessness recommendations report, where we'll incorporate 10 strategic actions that will help reduce and prevent homelessness and strengthen social supports for people experiencing homelessness. And so that will be released in October of 2024. Next slide, please. So with that being said, I wanted to briefly overview what our schedule will look like with all of this work. So far, we've had one meeting with the City Council in May, just to introduce the project as we're doing with you today. And then our next meeting has yet to be scheduled, but the purpose of that will be to present our draft recommendations and gather feedback. So it might be a little bit closer to that September timeframe. And then we'll do some engagement with the Homelessness Advisory Committee, and that will probably take place in the mid-June to mid-July timeframe, where we're going to be doing all of our interviews and focus groups. And then in the meantime, while we're doing all of that, that's when we're going to be doing our gap analysis and moving forward with drafting our report. And we're planning to have a draft for review by the end of August. And so we've scheduled in some time for the city to review the results that we've come up with. And then we'll do any adjustments in September, leading into our completion of the report in October. Next slide, please.
Before you go on, I also want to bring to the committee's attention. So basically on this same timeline, the city will be working on our housing action plan. And so about I think by the end of calendar year, we're supposed to have that housing action plan complete. Okay. And so the value of that is that you'll have this homelessness report completed nearly at the same time as the housing action plan. So you have a pretty solid picture of what's going on in the homelessness and housing arena in the city of Madras. So I'm looking forward to that because we'll have both of these reports complete at the same time and be able to have a full and complete conversation about that. So.
Thanks for adding some of that context. So yeah, I want to get a little bit into talking about what our framework and approach is going to be for the recommendations report. So with a lot of the work we've done around homelessness, we've conducted some background research, just looking at the variety of causes of homelessness, and that kind of helps shape what our recommendations are going to be. And a lot of our background research has found that of the possible causes, housing costs and availability is largely reported to be one of the larger root causes of homelessness. And so I won't go too far into the details because we'll have that in our report, but I put some information on the screen from a book called Homelessness is a Housing Problem, written by Greg Colburn. This study looked at a bunch of continuums of care in the US and compared rates of homelessness between those locations, and also looked at a variety of different factors that can influence homelessness, and studied through some statistical testing to determine which of those factors indicated a higher correlation between the variance in homelessness. And essentially, the study found that housing cost and availability were more highly correlated with the differences in homelessness rates between these different locations than other factors such as poverty and drug use, unemployment, mental health, etc. And so this is the framework that we're going to be thinking through as we're thinking about our recommendations. And this is some of the information that will appear in our background literature. And so a lot of our recommendations will be focused on that housing availability and cost topic. Next slide, please.
Yeah, before we go on, I do want to recognize that Mike Baker, so the Public Health Department had the Community and Action Prevention Summit on the 24th. I can't remember if it was at that summit or if I'm maybe hearing it from the Eco Northwest team. I seem to recall there was a discussion about opioid use in West Virginia, how opioid use was a little higher, but their homelessness rates in West Virginia were lower. Trent's shaking his head.
Yeah.
So we've heard that somewhere in some of these meetings we've been at together. But to me, that is a very interesting kind of general perspective or difference between the two states in our homelessness and opioid use, and kind of underscores this point here.
Thank you. So yes, that is something I wanted to briefly touch on, that we don't want to completely ignore the behavioral health factors like mental health or substance use. That will be briefly touched on in our background literature as well. But what you'll notice is that our background research will show that behavioral health factors are more so amplifiers of one person's likelihood of becoming homeless, rather than a root cause on a wider scale. And so I like to think of it in the same way as this quote on the screen is showing, that personal vulnerabilities such as mental health or substance use might explain who becomes homeless in a given community, but it's the housing costs and availability that tends to predict the rate of homelessness on a wider scale. And another good example, that a metaphorical example that came up in the book, was just a thought experiment of like musical chairs. You know, if you have 9 chairs, 10 people, music starts playing, and when it stops, everyone has to find a chair, and the one person who doesn't, loses the game. Well, if that one person happened to have a broken foot and they were on crutches, they didn't get to the chair fast enough because of that. But in this example, we would consider the root cause the fact that there are only 9 chairs. And then the personal vulnerability is the fact that the person had crutches. There was always going to be one person who didn't get a chair, but it happened to be this particular person because they had a disadvantage. And so that's kind of a great way in my mind to think about this behavioral personal vulnerability versus root cause. And then if you go to the next slide, this actually is about the West Virginia example you just brought up, Nick. And so I won't cover it in too much detail, but like you said, Huntington has a very high rate of overdoses and substance use. I believe they were dubbed the overdose capital of America. And yet they have a much lower homelessness population than, say, Los Angeles County. And part of the explanation for that is that they have much cheaper housing and more available housing. And so that's kind of helped to keep their homelessness rate low, despite the fact that there are still people who are struggling with substance use and, potentially along with that, some mental health issues. Next slide, please. And so one thing to note is that this background research is on a national scale, and it's focused on cities that aren't the city of Madras. And so that's why we want to do our community engagement with people in Madras, and we want to look more into housing market and the demographics and really have more of a local context to inform our recommendations as well. And so with our demographic analysis, we want to look at things like population, age, race, ethnicity, and poverty level. We're obviously going to pull the rates of homelessness, partially relying on the point in time count, and then pulling in any other data that we can find. And then when we get into our housing market analysis, that's where we're going to look at things like the housing stock and housing affordability. Next slide, please. So this information will feed into our recommendations. The way we're going to frame our 10 recommendations is we're going to pull them into these action sheets. This is something we've used for a lot of other projects. And as you can see, they're put into these sort of tables where you get a description, some considerations to explore, possible implementation steps. And so we could customize this in whatever way is most helpful to the city, but we find that this is particularly helpful for comparison's sake when you're trying to evaluate potential actions to explore in the future. And so we hope that framing our recommendations in this way will be particularly useful. We can go to the next slide. I also wanted to talk about the risks and opportunities that can come with this project. We had a conversation earlier about the historical difficulty with quantifying and characterizing the needs of homeless people in Madras. I think it can be difficult to get individual level experience data. Just it can be hard to engage people with lived experience in general. And so that is one potential risk, is that it might be difficult, especially because when you're engaging impacted communities, that tends to require a trauma-informed approach. Fortunately, my colleague Madeline has done this type of engagement before, and so she has some experience with facilitating these types of intergroup interviews and focus groups. But of course, there are always risks with doing this kind of engagement. However, there are some opportunities, and one of those opportunities is just being able to develop a shared understanding among the city and the Homelessness Advisory Committee on what the causes are of homelessness in Madras, and therefore, what are the best solutions to solving that. So hopefully we can help give you the information you need to shape your decision-making in the future. And then, of course, a new pathway to measuring housing need and increasing future engagement with impacted residents. So hopefully this project will serve as a template for what to do in the future. Next slide, please. So the last thing I want to cover is what we hope to get from the Homelessness Advisory Committee as we engage with you in the future. We're wanting to hear from you. What are the gaps in the programs and services? What have you seen as you've worked intimately with the homeless population? What exists and what is missing? We also are curious what kinds of recommendations you think we should explore. And are there recommendations that you think we should prioritize? And then as we move into our interviews and focus groups, we're always looking for more information about who we should be talking to, especially when it comes to inviting those with lived experience, because it can be hard to find people with lived experience. If you know service providers that can connect us with those people, then that would be extremely helpful. And so if there's any way we can get assistance with recruitment or with hosting a focus group, we would particularly appreciate that. So that is what I have for today. I want to open up the floor to questions, or if Nick, if you have anything to add. And if you don't have questions just yet, I've also put Madeline's name and contact information on the screen. I believe that Fatima shared this slide deck in advance of the meeting in case you want to see that contact information later. But yes, thank you so much.
So I think our emeritus vice chair, Mike Baker, had a couple comments.
First, a quick question. The reason why 10 strategic actions were selected, is it your kind of template response has these 10 things that you kind of go in and fill in? Or I'm just not clear on the selection of 10 as the number to move forward with.
I think that I think the idea behind picking 10 is to not overwhelm the city with too many things to move forward with at once. I think we find that implementation and just deciding between actions is a lot easier when you have a more manageable number of actions. So that's my understanding. I'm not sure if Beth, you have anything else to add?
I do. I think there's oftentimes responses to things like homelessness that are similar across cities, but the implementation details are really different in each city. So it's very, very much city dependent, but there's not 10 things we suggest for, addressing homelessness. 10 is a somewhat arbitrary number. So
Okay.
maybe in the end it'll end up being 9, or maybe in the end it'll end up being 11.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get at. And then my second comment is with the housing market data. I have a little bit of concern when we look at that data, especially with the recent work that the city of Madras has done and with the phenomenal planning commission, the work that they have been working on. I think some of the housing data is going to be greatly skewed, especially within the last 3 to 5 years, based on some of that work. So when you look at the housing demand and housing data, how do you take into consideration the recent push to make housing more affordable local versus kind of what that historical norm has been when we look at housing in Madras area?
Taylor, could I take that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we'd start from the work that we did with Nick for the housing capacity analysis that the city adopted last year. And part of what it showed was a lot of need. A lot of households have income below 50% of median family income, which means that they are at risk of becoming homeless. We also know that that data does not include representations of people who are actually homeless. So I think what we know going into this is the need for housing at the lower end of the income spectrum is great. When we're doing the housing action plan, we'll be looking at that also. And if you think about housing need as a continuum, where homelessness is one end of the continuum, and market rate housing that's affordable to people with around median income is the other end of the continuum, and then the market's taking care of the highest end. Part of what will be important is coordinating between these two different projects, because part of avoiding homelessness is about having housing that is relatively affordable at the lower levels. So the city of Madras has been doing excellent things in that direction. And when I say it's never enough, I would say that for any community. Even when the city has been making the efforts that I know that the city has been making, it's still never enough. So I think the point here is to acknowledge the efforts the city has been making, call them out, and then talk about what comes next.
Okay, and that I appreciate that. And then also with Madras and its rural nature in comparison to Deschutes County and Bend and Redmond, which are really driving the housing market, does that rurality come into your work when you're doing this, or is it just the big regional housing market analysis?
We will definitely be incorporating the rurality here and making sure that that's a big consideration. Madeline would be able to speak to this more, but we've done some homelessness work in rural communities before, so we do have experience with pulling in that perspective. I just I would defer to Madeline to speak to the specifics of that, or I'm not sure if Beth would have anything else to add, but.
Well, what I would add is that the context is the regional context but the specific issues and solutions are Madras specific. So in other words, you're part of Central Oregon, obviously, and what's going on in Madras is very much affected by what's going on in Bend and Redmond. But you've got some unique issues, and your solutions have to be suited to the community.
All right, perfect. I appreciate hearing. And then one
Well,
last
Dr. Baker, I would also say that the regional perspective or the regional factors that are contributing to homelessness in Madras need to be understood, but locally, we have different circumstances, right? And so we have to understand that. And I think when you look at our homelessness historically, if you go back to 2008 to 2016, we still had homeless people in our community, looking back at the point in time counts, even though housing activity was booming post the 2008 recession, right? So in my mind, regardless of what happens in Deschutes County, even in Crook County, we still have a homelessness. And so we have to understand those factors as well. But part of that local homelessness issue or the factors contributing to it are the regional issues as well. Does that make sense?
Does, great, and thank you. And then my only final comment would be my concern when we look at having community engagement as part of this process. Sometimes we're very limited with community participation, especially when we look at focus group and those individuals with lived experience. So whatever our timeline is for helping to make sure that happens, I would definitely extend that just based on experience that it takes a while to get involvement in some of this work. So that's it.
Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Baker. He was gone for what I thought was 11, now it's 12 weeks, but appreciate having you back. And of course, the Planning Commission really misses you. We do have a vacancy, by the way. Beth remembers that when you were on the Planning Commission as well. For the committee, one thing I would say is if you have data related to homelessness, I would ask you for that data so that I can share that with Eco Northwest so it's considered in the report. So this is something I'm starting to see is more of a trend for the city, that there's data out there, but I have to kind of coax it. And I'm not just looking at Dr. Baker, but oftentimes we're faced with using state or national data sources that don't necessarily color the picture of Madras very well, or to the detail or the accuracy that we need. So if your agency or your organization has some information on homelessness or the factors contributing to that, we would ask that you share that with us so we can consider it. I'm sorry.
But,
Oh, okay. The comment was the final point in time count data is now posted on the Homeless Leadership Coalition website. Thank you for that, because I actually looked for it, I think a week or two ago, and it wasn't. So thank you for that report. Any other questions or comments? Great. Thank you, Taylor, and always good to see you, Beth. Appreciate your great work, and we'll be in touch.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, Vice Chair Trent, I'll hand it back to you, but I think you're going to throw it back to me anyways, so.
All right, yep. Throwing it back to you, the update on the Northwest Willow Creek camping area removal.
Thank you. I'm going to share the screen here, and just in case there's anyone online, there is a quick memo in front of you, and this is something that I drafted in fact today, but we're still finalizing some of our plans for the camp closure. And while I haven't included a lot of the details, wanted to keep it generally a high level. And as the committee would like to drill down or get into some greater detail, I'm happy to answer any of those questions. With that though, as the committee likely knows, the city will be closing the Northwest Willow Creek camp on June 11th. The city will be posting signs to that effect, giving more than the required 72-hour notice of that closure this week. We're going to post those signs in 3 places that are very visible or conspicuous. And accordingly, we're working with a lot of our fellow community partners to pull this off. You can see the agencies involved listed there. And then in the right column, I've tried to just generally identify their kind of roles, responsibilities at a high level. One of the things that we're struggling with right now, we just can't understand the level of effort or labor that will be needed to disassemble these camps and sort through the materials there to determine what personal belongings that have been left behind that need to be stored or in fact disposed of. Marco, our code enforcement officer, and I will actually be sorting these items. What we're needing behind us, so to speak, is folks to move those bags or help kind of move the trash, generally speaking. I think it's important for this committee to know that we've thought a lot about storing these personal belongings that are left behind that, based on the city's policy, need to be stored. And we will be taking photographs of those items before they get bagged. We have case numbers that identify that are specific to each camp, and we also have a alphabetization of each camp, so there's ability to cross-reference. So we'll be taking pictures of both the items that we store and dispose, and then once they're put into a bag, they will have a tag with the case number, the campsite index on there, alphabetized index, and then they'll be moved aside for storage later that afternoon or later time. I have briefed this with some of our Madras Police Department staff, and I did think that was a very solid plan so that we can understand what is being stored, what is not being stored, and then all that information will be uploaded into the city's code enforcement database for each case number, including the photos. So if someone comes in and say, hey, you know, I had, I'll completely make this up, pair of black Nike sneakers, we can look through the photos at each camp, determine whether they were put into a bag or not. And if not, we would still look, but likely we'd have the ability without going through all of those bags. So the other aspect in terms of needs is, and I think this is fairly intuitive to this committee, I think we could just never have enough resources for these individuals. We just, you know, you never really know how it's going to go. One of the leaders of the camp has requested some tents. I did get a report from one of our partners that tents is probably going to be something that would be helpful for moving them out of the camp location. So that's something the city is going to have to look at and likely rely upon our community partners if we're not able to purchase those for various reasons. We do have 2 alternative campsite locations that the campers within the camp can go to. We have the 3rd and Oak Street campsite, and that is directly west of the Madras Homeless Service Center. And then, of course, the Homeless Service Center is itself, providing nightly stays, meals, bathing, and navigation is needed there. So,
Nick, a question, and or Marco, do we know the census right now, the numbers of what's currently in the Willow Creek camp in terms of numbers?
I personally do not, and the reason for that is that I have not gone into each camp, if you will, but I estimate to be somewhere between 8 and maybe as many as 15, but I'm not seeing anything likely beyond that.
How many people are asking for tents?
We have 1 individual now. There may be a few more.
We're not going to be in a I mean, this is like a one-time shot, right? We're not going to be maintaining a,
No, it's exactly right, Chair Lapine. The thought is that the acquisition and allocation of tents would be given to them to help them move out and find another appropriate location. But if that is not taken care of, maybe damaged due to their lack of care, we're not going to replace it.
Nick, I was informed today that through the HLC that we might be able to secure some tents. So if we could, I thought about at least a dozen in my mind to begin with, but if the need is possibly greater than that, if I can find that out sooner than later, then I can perhaps put in a request for that. And I'm thinking that when we're focusing on tents, obviously it's not the bigger size tents, I don't know, but it'd be more that'd be portable, be able to wrap up, because the folks are gonna have to be on the move for 12 hours a day.
Yeah,
So
we were thinking
obviously-
4-man tents.
Four-man tents, okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Speaking with, I've been down there multiple times over the last several weeks. Last time yesterday, I can tell you that yesterday, the amount of people that we contacted down there late morning, probably no more than 7. Some of them were out, some of them that I know that are living down there, they were out, but I'm guessing you're looking 12 to 15, most likely. As far as the tents, I have specifically spoken with individuals that live down there. So this is my line of thought, is we are opening up that 3rd and Oak Street camp area. You don't want them in, probably, a 10 by 10 type area. I don't want them taking all their tarps up there because they're not going to be able to move those on a daily basis. And I think that it's unrealistic to think that they can move those up there easily and then, take them down and move them with them throughout the day. The other thing is this, that I would put out here to this group, is to look at getting them some cheap backpacks. And I know that y'all know this, but we're dealing with people. This has been their home for quite some time. And, I'm thinking as I'm sitting here listening to this, I'm thinking about the shopping cart issue. Why not get them some backpacks where that morning at 7 o'clock or maybe the night before to be able to take to them? We're talking with them on a regular basis, and all of them that I have talked to are ready to go. Not that they want to, but they're ready to go. They know that it's coming. And if we can give them some backpacks and small tents to where they can put their few belongings that they do have in there and the tent, because they're going to have 12 hours a day or 11 hours a day where they're going to have to be walking around, and they can't just leave that. We want them to be able to take care of those things. And no, I don't think that this is something where it's to replenish this every 30 days or 60 days or every 6 months. I mean, there's other organizations that are out there that can help them with that. But I think to start this process, yesterday, even talking with a couple, because of the garbage that was moved out of there, they actually sounded appreciative and they were excited. So the tone there, I think, has changed dramatically over the last 6 weeks. Well, you figure 12 to 15 people. So, in case there ends up being a couple more, because I don't know everyone that's down there. But, yeah, that would be great.
A backpacking kit, one that's light, they're gonna carry it, right? They're gonna give them a heavy one, but if they have a light 1, 2 person tent,
you know, it's easy to assemble. Seats reasonable, they can put their, like Steve's point, they can pack everything the day before, have it ready to go when we show up. Hopefully they just move along.
And for, also, kind of being selfish on this, but there may be some individuals there that don't know how to put up a tent or take down, a normal tent. And but if I go help somebody, or if Tony goes to help somebody, or Trent, I'd like to be able to easily, this fairly new, clean tent, be able to help them or show them how to, get it there in the backpack.
Can you let the city know what you determine on the backpacks and the tents? So that I can see what we can do on our end? Yeah, perfect.
And then we'll also check within funding and see if something like this would be an allowable expense. I'm wondering whether it would be. Mm.
I don't know if this is the right spot to bring this up, but also for, because we're moving into this next Tuesday. Is if Tuesday morning, if some people can come up with, I don't know, breakfast sandwiches or coffee or something while we're down there with them and talking with them and maybe helping them out as they make this move.
Yeah, let me talk to Pat about that. That may very well be possible. Yeah, we just need to get kind of a number and what would be helpful. Yeah.
So two last things. There is two meetings that are planned by the city to prepare. The first is on June 5th at 9 a.m. here at City Hall. Probably most of you in the room have been invited to that, or at least your agencies have been invited to that. And the idea is just to prepare, little, 7 days in advance, making sure we're thinking clearly about this, make sure we haven't forgotten anything. And then on Monday, the 10th at 8 a.m. at the B Street Public Works Shops, we'll have our second and final preparation meeting. Just again, double check on supplies, plans and logistics, things like that. Pursuant to this, I know Will did want to talk about a memorandum that I asked him to issue this week. There's some kind of legal implications to it, or belt and suspender approach, meaning just double checking we're crossing all of our T's, dotting all of our I's legally. Will, do you want me to overview that, or would you like to do that?
No, go ahead, Nick. And just to let you know, I didn't print enough copies for everybody, so have to have folks share.
Yeah. So late last week, city staff did another review of our city codes related to camping and identified the need for the city administrator to make a declaration of the Northwest Willow Creek Camp to be closed, and for certain reasons. In this case, that it didn't meet the requirements of the code for camps. And so the memo identifies those factors that we believe have not been met and necessitate the closure of the camp, and therefore declaring the camp closed on June 11th at 7 a.m. This is important for city staff as we go about doing our work, that we're consistent with the code. I think all of us generally have an understanding of this, but just a small piece of the puzzle towards this effort. Questions, comments on that?
Nick, have the campers been notified? I mean, this language now, and what I understand is this is not remediation and reopening. This is closure. And so my question is, have the campers been notified that this camp will be closed?
They've been verbally notified, and this week the signs will be installed, as I noted earlier, in 3 conspicuous spaces in English and in Spanish. with anti-graffiti coating on those.
And then, Tony, I'm gonna ask the council sometime between June, July to create a park down there, create a space for park. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done to turn it into a park, but create the space that it would be a future park. And that comes with different rules and regulations with respect to that.
Chair Titus, that concludes my report on that, unless there's any other questions or comments.
Sorry, this is Mike. I do have additional question and just back right before we'll show this thing. We have the list of the agencies involved. And it's just a clarification. Here you say Cascade U Family Center, JBRJ, that's Cascade Youth and Family.
Yes,
Center,
that's a
correct?
typo, I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm super excited to see behavioral health coming out of Warm Springs to support that. But I'm also curious, Cindy, on what Best Care has thought about or done, or if there's anything formal that Best Care is going to be doing to help with the move as the county mental health provider. Okay. Are they planning on having like a, what is the trauma team called? I can't remember even the crisis management team. Sorry, I hadn't heard, but it's great to see some partners stepping up on the list, but I would really like to see, Best Care even in bold, that they're going to be doing so much to help with this transition, because that's going to be a huge need. Like Tony mentioned, there may be some individuals that finally realize that this is actually happening now and it's permanent, so. Okay, perfect. All right.
Indeed, unfortunately, I'm not able to report that. But I've been there every Tuesday and I actually really appreciate the question of what is Best Care doing? Because we haven't had I haven't had any communication with them for over a month on this. So if you could report back on what your organization could do, it'd be very appreciated. Thank you so much. Great discussion. Thank you.
All right, we'll jump down on the agenda. Any additional topics of discussion?
I don't think so. Fatma will keep up to date your calendars on our next meeting. And of course, on the next meeting, we'll have Eliza come back with the Homeless Leadership Coalition. We'll also have, of course, probably a post camp closure report for the committee as these two main topics.
I'd like to say sorry for my tardiness. I was otherwise detained. Can't get into why. Trent, thank you so much for picking up where I was absent and taken out. It looks like you did a great job. And Stacy, welcome to our group.
Yes, thank you, Stacy. And Chair Lapine, our emeritus vice chair, did show up too. And so we were thankful for that.
Really? Oh, it was good to see you.
Great to have him back. With that, would you like to adjourn the meeting?
There, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.